Hello and welcome back to 365 Days with mxmtoon. I'm Maia, a singer, songwriter, videomaker, Oakland native, and massive fan of history facts. I love untold stories, gross facts, hidden secrets, anything weird, dark, and funky from the past. Each day, I'm going to share a few of my favorite deep cuts with you. So let's look at today's story.
It's 365 with mxmtoon. New facts every day, so don't leave too soon. I'm gonna teach you stuff, no it won't be tough. Gonna go a year till you've had enough. It's 365 mxmtoon.
On September 27th, 1954, on the heels of the famed Brown v. Board of Education Supreme Court ruling, schools in Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, Maryland finally began to integrate. This was a huge deal and a long, long time coming. But let's back up. For decades, schools in the United States were segregated by race. Though this was not just the case in the South. In fact, one of the first court cases that ruled in favor of segregation was in the Massachusetts Supreme Court in 1849. School segregation persisted longer below the Mason-Dixon line, which, fun fact, is more of an L shape than a straight line, thanks to the Jim Crow laws, which were first passed in Louisiana in 1890. Jim Crow laws were state and local laws that enforced segregation by race. In 1896, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of segregation in the infamous court case Plessy v. Ferguson, which ruled that racial segregation was legal as long as it was kept separate but equal. Of course, in practice, though, things were not equal. Black students often attended more underfunded, overcrowded, run-down schools than white students, despite the Plessy ruling. And, in general, segregation made Black students feel inferior to white students, not just in schools, but in all segregated public spaces. In 1951, a man named Oliver Brown decided that he had had enough. He wanted his daughter, Linda Brown, to attend a white school in Topeka, Kansas. When she was denied entry, he sued Topeka's Board of Education, pointing out that Black and white schools were not equal, and that segregation actually violated the 14th Amendment, which claimed that no state could deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Eventually, Brown's case made it in front of the United States Supreme Court for the case Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka. You've probably heard it shortened to Brown v. Board of Education. The case against school segregation was argued by a man named Thurgood Marshall, then the head of the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund. Marshall would later become the first Black Supreme Court justice, but from 1952 to 1954, he served as a chief attorney on the nation's landmark school integration. Initially, it looked like the court might actually rule in favor of segregation, as it's done several times in the past. The justices were split on their vote early on, but in 1953, the Supreme Court Justice Fred M. Vinson died, and President Dwight Eisenhower appointed Earl Warren to replace him. And a totally non-related fun fact about Eisenhower is that he banished the White House's squirrels because they were ruining his putting green. If only I could be that dramatic. On May 17, 1954, under Warren, the justices ruled unanimously against segregation, overturning Plessy's separate but equal doctrine and ruling that school segregation was in fact inherently unequal. School districts did not start desegregating immediately, though, but Washington, D.C. schools did have to desegregate that fall, mostly thanks to a second 1954 Supreme Court case, Balling v. Sharp. That case made segregation in Washington, D.C. illegal. Since D.C. is not a state, the court had to make a federal ruling. There were, of course, a lot of white students and families who resented having to integrate. At Taft Junior High in D.C., white students staged a walkout. White students at McKinley Tech and Anacostia High School did the exact same. Desegregation wasn't quite as openly violent or headline-grabbing as it would become at Central High in Little Rock, Arkansas a few years later, where 9 Black students, the Little Rock Nine, as they were called, had to be escorted into school by federal troops when the state's governor had the National Guard block the school doors. But it still took time for white students and their families to accept integration. In Baltimore City, the school board quickly voted to desegregate, but they also made integration voluntary, which meant the process moved very slowly. Baltimore also separated its schools by district, which perpetuated segregation. Children who lived in white neighborhoods went to predominantly white schools, and children who lived in Black neighborhoods went to predominantly Black schools. Unfortunately, this particular form of segregation has persisted to this day, in Baltimore and in other school districts all over the country. As much as we would like to believe segregation, and to a greater extent, racism in general, is a thing of the past, the structural systems we continue to abide by in the 21st century tend to perpetuate racism and white supremacy, even if Black school children don't technically have to take a different bus. For those of you interested in interrogating the role school segregation has played in your own life, you might want to check out some of the great books out there, like Cutting School, Privatization, Segregation, and the End of Public Education by Noliwe Rooks, which explores unequal schooling and the push towards using public school resources for charter schools. And in an effort to be more than just not racist, but anti-racist, as in actively helping to dismantle white supremacy, I recommend you read as much anti-racism literature by Black writers as possible, nonfiction and fiction. Follow Black writers and academics on Twitter and Instagram. Vote out elected candidates pushing the privatization of schools and expanding charter schools. Pay attention to school redistricting in the cities and towns that you live in and grew up in. It's not the 1950s anymore, but things aren't as different now as we like to think they are. We live in a time where we need to make radical change. Your voice matters, and doing your part to make sure that you're actively working against the systems in place is the least we can do. If a singular person can make waves, think of how powerful we are when we work together as a group. And now for today's music fact. On this date in 2013, a singer-songwriter from New Zealand named Ella Yelich-O'Connor released her debut album. Ella's stage name? Lorde. The album? Pure Heroine. The album's single Royals was a massive hit, charting at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, and the album itself was a huge commercial hit, propelling Lorde to pop music stardom. Lorde was only 16 when Pure Heroine dropped. When Royals won a Song of the Year Grammy, she became the youngest person ever to get the award. And for today's final segment, I'm going to be hopping into my photo archives to see what I was up to on a September 27th in my life. Okay, so I don't really know how much is going to be interesting in my day-to-day life that I share with you. I have a couple things here that are it's like really funny to see the mundane things that I took photos of and thought were important enough to document. So on September 27th, 2016, I had an agenda written on my Algebra 2 whiteboard that said, "Quiz going up on a Tuesday." And so I took a photo of that because I guess that was relevant and funny that my teacher wrote that. And then in 2018, on September 27th, I I played bingo with my favorite characters from My Hero Academia, which is an anime. And it's just funny that I took the time out of my day to mark off which characters were my favorite and which ones were my least favorite. So if you're curious and you watch My Hero Academia, my all-time favorite is Todoroki. I wrote him down as being my favorite. And Mineta is my least favorite. I crossed him off with a big red X. Well, yeah, those are my fun facts for September 27th. And I mean, what were you guys up to? It can't have been less interesting than what I was doing. And with that, we'll wrap up this episode of 365 Days with mxmtoon. Thank you all so much for listening. Make sure if you like this podcast, you subscribe wherever you listen to them, and follow along at 365 Days mxmtoon on all platforms. I hope you like this episode, and I will talk to you tomorrow.
It's 365 with mxmtoon. New facts every day, so don't leave too soon. I'm gonna teach you stuff, no it won't be tough. Gonna go a year till you've had enough. It's 365